All right, we are live. What is happening, everyone? I'm John Blair, founder of Free to Grow CFO. For those of you that don't know me, we are an outsourced finance firm that works exclusively with growing e-commerce brands, and our e-commerce fractional CFO and bookkeeping services. They're here to provide growing e-commerce brands with the finance expertise that you need to scale alongside healthy profit, cash flow, and confidence, but without the full-time finance salaries. Today, I'm super excited to be chatting with my good buddy Thomas Gleeson, who's joining us all the way from across the pond out in Ireland. He is the co-founder of StoreHero, a super awesome new software platform that's bridging the gap between e-commerce marketing and finance functions. And today, we're going to be talking about what we call the Q4 Profit First Playbook. And what does that mean? In simple terms, we're going to be chatting about how to leverage your ad spend decisions to optimize your bottom line profitability in the context of Q4, the big holiday season that's coming up. And so, with that being said, Thomas, I'd love for you to just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what you're doing over there at StoreHero.
Thanks very much for having me, John. Really looking forward to the chat this evening. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Thomas Gleeson. I'm the co-founder here at StoreHero.ai. So StoreHero is a SaaS platform for D2C brands and agencies to really centralize not just their Shopify and their paid marketing, but also things like your Klaviyo metrics, GA metrics, and then also fusing that in with a more financial element as well. So we also want to make sure that we're calculating things like shipping costs, transaction fees, 3PL fees, and then you can also overlay things like your operational expenses, so staff costs, rent costs, and software costs. Really what we're trying to do fundamentally is to get businesses to truly understand their core margins, unit economics, and profitability, not just on a business level, but also on a product and an order level as well. I think over the last number of years, ads have got more expensive. The real focus margin has come under scrutiny and become almost a prerequisite for everyone to really and truly understand for the first time. So we're really helping business owners across the globe to really refine all of this and to really just get their business in order. Prior to StoreHero, I worked at Shopify for 3.5 years as a senior consultant, and I grew up in a house with e-commerce at home. My mother's actually had an e-commerce business for nearly 20 years, so back to the days of dial-up internet. So we were kind of born into e-commerce as long as I can remember.
I love it. I'm super excited about what StoreHero is doing. I've been in the platform, and it's doing some really awesome things to help connect, really be the through line between marketing and finance. And so, without taking any more time for introductions, let's dive in, and I'm gonna hand it off to Thomas so we can start chatting through the Q4 Profit First Playbook really quick. If we have time at the end for questions, we'll be answering them. So if you have any along the way out there, throw them in the comments or the chat, and we'll try to answer them at the end. So with that being said, take it away, Thomas.
Thanks, John. Okay, so last week we actually released our Q4 Profit First Playbook, as you can see on the screen here. You can download it directly at our website at StoreHero.ai. Essentially, it's 54 pages of really just trying to understand your core acquisition, retention, your conversion metrics, all of your core unit economics. And we've got some of the top industry leaders, including yourself, John, have contributed finally to the Q4 playbook. And I mean, the feedback so far has been incredible. We've really took a lot of time into it. We put an awful lot of time and effort into it to really make it a valuable resource. And of course, it's free. So I'd encourage everyone who's watching today to go on, have a quick check, and I'm sure you'll get some really useful value out of it. Okay, so in today's webinar, what are we going to be covering? So we want to, obviously, with time of the year, 10th of October, less than 50 days to BFCM. So we're really going to be talking about getting your business ready for Q4, looking through your discounting and offers, looking through your retention strategies, really trying to understand what that contribution margin piece. And then, as you mentioned, John, we might kind of close with some remarks and some closing questions to really just help the audience understand anything that we might have gone through throughout the next 55 minutes, I suppose. Okay, so let's look first of all at Black Friday 2022. What happened? So 11.3 billion in sales across the BFCM weekend, up 4% on the previous year. E-commerce in general, over 107 billion in annual sales as reported by Adobe, up 8.7% last year. 8 p.m. on Cyber Monday was the busiest hour. Everybody bargain hunting, looking for those last minute deals before the BFCM weekend closed out. And not surprisingly, 73% of purchases last year actually happened on mobile devices. So again, really, really important for everybody when you're in your Shopify and you're looking at your themes to be really optimizing and just viewing that your theme through the mobile lens as well, just to ensure that you're optimizing for the mobile experience above all else. Okay, so the key dates that people probably need to be getting in line to keep in line with for this year. Obviously, we've got Halloween, the end of this month. Singles Day. This is an event that really started in Asia a number of years ago, but has really taken the e-commerce landscape by storm. Singles Day is definitely not just an Asian-specific kind of holiday day, I suppose, for the e-com calendar. It's global now, and I would advise everyone to familiarize yourself with what it actually is, and definitely try and get some promo out around that weekend or that day. Then we're looking to the Black Friday lead-in, so 21st to the 23rd of December. Typically, we're seeing now in the last couple of years that these sales are probably starting earlier and earlier. Previously, in years gone by, we would have seen that most people would have held off until the BFCM weekend to really launch their sales, but that's happening in the lead-in couple of days beforehand, and even throughout the month of November as well. Obviously, then we've got our Black Friday weekend kicking off on the 24th, all the way through to November 27th this year when we have Cyber Monday. So as you mentioned, as we saw on the last slide there, busiest time for the whole weekend last year was 8 p.m. on Cyber Monday. So again, just beware that kind of, I suppose, maybe look to set up different promos or different offers for different days of the weekend, all with the idea, I suppose, that Cyber Monday towards the end of the day is probably going to be your busiest time period. Holiday season doesn't end after Black Friday. We do have a good lead in then from the 1st to the 18th of December. Typically with EComm, after the 18th of December, we will start to see that kind of lull period when people won't be as confident they might get their packages in time for Christmas. And then obviously we have our post Boxing Day sales from 26th to the 7th of January and there on in. So just some key dates to remember. Nice to recap, I suppose, just to kick things off.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out, like from my perspective, that I talk to clients about all the time as it relates to Q4, it's like, what is at stake with Q4 maximizing profitability? And when I look at these timelines every year, I'm reminded that this is prime time. And if you leave opportunity on the table, you're leaving prime. It is your prime time to generate profitability. A lot of the brands that I work with, 30, 40, 50, sometimes 75% of their revenue and profit comes from Q4. And you look at this timeline, you really only have weeks to kill it, right? And crush it and achieve your goals. And so what we're going to talk about here with optimizing profit in Q4 is key, because once the holiday season is over, once these dates have passed, you got to wait until next year for the next one to come.
For sure. And I suppose, yeah, it's you're so right. I mean, 65, 75 is quite a high number, but we do see brands like that kind of all the time coming into StoreHero where they're incredibly Q4 heavy. So just making sure that you have all of your offers planned out, your content strategies planned out, you know what you're doing from a paid ads perspective, and not leaving it until last minute, because that can happen. And it can be easy to get overwhelmed, I suppose, when everything starts to kick off. So preparation is key really here. Before we dive into that, I suppose we're looking at EComm and has it got harder this year over the last 18 months? And the answer is absolutely yes. I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast or this webinar this evening has seen their ad costs significantly rise in the last year, probably due to a number of reasons. Increased competition post-COVID, everybody's now online. Most people are advertising on the same marketing channels. Attribution issues as a result of iOS 14 has meant that your ability to really refine that targeting probably isn't as sharp as it was a couple of years ago, and just meant your ad costs have probably got that bit more expensive. No secret, I suppose, that inflation has really crept in the macro environment in the last 18 months, leading to probably slightly poorer purchasing power from the consumer as well. And obviously just there, I saw a report from, I think it was Google 2 or 3 weeks ago, that indicated that the actual cost of ads has gone up ballpark around 30% in the last 18 months, which is almost like a silent tax that's been applied to your e-commerce business. So understanding that and planning for it is never been more important. Perfect. Okay, so I suppose looking at the profit first playbook, and I suppose we speak to brands all the time and they come to us and they're trying to grow, and understanding what you're trying to grow is incredibly important because they often require very, very different strategies. I think in general, in e-commerce, we've become very fascinated with revenue orientated metrics, sales, obviously, average order value, sometimes even customer lifetime value, which we will come on to in a few minutes. But really trying to understand, what are you actually trying to grow? Is it your top line sales? Are you trying to grow your profitability? If you are trying to just grow your sales, you can really afford to spend aggressively. Your primary focus is going to be really on acquiring new customers, and you can often afford to lose money on acquiring those customers. That can make sense sometimes, but you need to make sure that you're planning to lose money in those customers. It can't be an afterthought or a byproduct of poor planning. When would it make sense? Well, if you were planning to grow your business internationally or launch a new product range, you might understand that you need to spend and invest in paid marketing that mightn't immediately yield results, to kind of break into that market or to generate new customers that will hopefully generate a better customer lifetime value over time. Secondly, their profitability mode. And we often, when we speak to businesses coming to us and they say they're trying to grow, they're really actually trying to grow their profitability. It isn't often their top line sales. When you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, they're running their business, and there often isn't much left for them at the end of the day. So if you're looking to grow your profitability, there's a number of different areas that you can look at, I suppose. And you're really, first of all, going to be looking to improve your margins. And that doesn't always just mean your product margin. You can often shop around for improving your fulfillment costs, improving your shipping costs, your transaction fees, and so on and so forth. Often, again, we speak to businesses where they are unsure of how to increase their ad spend. Attribution issues from Facebook and Google in the last couple of years have just meant that they're not as confident in the numbers that they're seeing. They might have 100K attributed from Facebook this month and 100K attributed from Google. And when they look at Shopify, they only have 180K. And there's often double counting going on that I'm sure everybody listening to this webinar has come across. So really just trying to, I suppose, double down and understand what that contribution margin piece looks like, which you will come on to in a few minutes, and really just making sure that you're only increasing your ad spend as that contribution margin continues to rise. And the last piece there, before I hand it over to yourself, John, around profitability mode, is just making sure that you're fully aware of the operational expenses that are going through the business. Have they crept up in the last number of years during COVID and post-COVID? Is every dollar that we're spending on operational expense, are they actually adding value, or are they actually just costing the business and we're just kind of letting them sit there? Every dollar that we save in operational expenses is going to flow directly to the bottom line. So this is a silent killer that I often see in a hell of a lot of businesses, where they actually mightn't have a contribution margin or problem or an ads problem, but they might have a profitability problem. And this is often just masked through inflated OPEX or bloated OPEX.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can say a lot on this topic, being a fractional CFO for e-com brands, but a couple of things that I think are really important to highlight on this topic. One is, I say this a lot. It can be controversial sometimes, and people don't agree with me. But I think in the end, it is always true. A business exists to be profitable. That's what makes it a business, and not what I call an expensive hobby. But that does not mean that there aren't times when the business is unprofitable, but the business does always have to be profitable eventually. So even if you're in growing sales mode, it needs to be in service of eventually becoming profitable, which we'll talk about more later, whether it's through LTV payback, through repeat purchases, or even if you're going to run a company at a loss, a bottom line loss, what's the eventual profitable outcome you're looking for? An acquisition that ultimately makes the unprofitable business profitable to its shareholders. And so the point is, you may choose to look at growing sales or be in growing sales mode at a product level or a channel level or a market level or even at the company level. But at some point, you have to change to profitability mode. And that's what makes your enterprise a business and not an expensive hobby. The other thing is, and we won't go into too much depth here because really a lot of what we're going to talk about is around contribution margin, but there's just a lot of confusion out there about what contribution margin actually means. I encounter I encounter probably 3 different definitions on a regular basis, but I've found up to 4 or 5 over the years, and understanding it and really understanding the difference between a fixed cost and a variable cost is really, really key. And I'll save that discussion for a later slide. But again, so like major talking points for me is you can be in grow sales mode, but eventually you have to transition to grow profitability mode. And so you better have the metrics system in place to tell the difference between whether you're in grow sales mode or grow profitability mode, and where the levers are that you can pull to transition from one to the other.
Sure, makes a ton of sense. Absolutely, couldn't have said it any better. Okay, perfect. Next up, we're going to move on to retention. Obviously, there's an old adage, it's much cheaper to hold on to a customer than acquire a new one. That being said, you cannot just turn off all of your Facebook and Google ads tomorrow and just focus on retention. Yes, that will work for a week or two, but you need to keep that top of funnel new customer acquisition coming in all the time, just to make sure that that customer retention piece is going to be as effective as it is. It needs to be almost a barbell approach. You cannot just focus on one over the other. Acquisition without retention is going to be useless, and retention without acquisition will be useful for a very, very small time until you haven't got enough new customers coming into the pipeline to really focus those retention strategies on them.
One thing that I want to mention about that is a really helpful analogy. I didn't make this up, can't take credit for this, but there's a savvy brand founder that I met a couple months ago, and he was in a situation where his new customer acquisition system had broken down, and the company was doing tens of millions in revenue on an annualized basis, and the run rate had basically been cut in half on a monthly basis. And his analogy for this whole retention versus, new customer acquisition was what he called the LTV piggy bank. He told me, he said, "Hey, John, right now we're alive because we're ringing in the LTV piggy bank, right? Meaning that this existing customer base was repurchasing, but eventually there's going to be no coins left in that LTV piggy bank unless we get new customer acquisition figured out. And I've got to go get laser focused on that, or we're going to die eventually."
100%. And there's only so long you can weigh one up over the other. If you just focus everything on retention, again, like you've just kind of alluded to there, eventually the well will dry up of new customer acquisition costs and of new customer acquisition coming in the door, and your retention efforts are just going to become stale with the people that you're consistently remarketing to. So again, next up, I suppose one very common metric that we all see in D2C every day is customer lifetime value. Probably you mentioned 4 or 5 different definitions for contribution margin, John. Well, LTV is definitely one that I see tens of different definitions for floating around. And it's really, really important to make sure that you're calculating your LTV on a margin basis. If anyone comes to you pitching LTV on a revenue basis, run as fast as you can, because it's a very, very dangerous predicament to find yourself in. If, for instance, you have a customer lifetime if someone tells you your customer lifetime value is €200 or $200, and that's actually your customer lifetime revenue. Say, for instance, you're working off $100 CAC. That's not your margin that you're working with. That's a very, very different business you think you're running. And if that's the fundamentals that you're building your business on, you just want to make sure that your fundamentals or your foundations that you're building the business on are as solid as possible. And just making sure that you're doing that on a margin basis as opposed to a revenue basis is just incredibly important. Shouldn't need to be said out loud, but I think it does, because I often see customer lifetime revenue purported as customer lifetime value, and the distinction between the two can just mean life or death for a business. So I just think it's incredibly important to just hammer that home as well.
Absolutely.
Next up, first order profitable in relation to customer lifetime value. Do you want to be? Does it make sense to be? Saying this to some businesses, it might sound ridiculous that you don't want to be profitable on your first order. Now, again, just to put the caveat onto this is very industry and product dependent. During my time at Shopify, I worked with brands that sold sofas and beds. You're not going to buy a sofa or a bed on a monthly basis or twice a year. But for instance, if you were a business selling coffee or toothpaste or collagen or whatever it was, hopefully that customer will be coming back every 6 weeks to every month. So the kind of CAC payback periods, or the customer lifetime value that you're expecting from that customer, will be very, very different, I suppose. If you were selling the sofa, you probably would need to be profitable on first order, because but the chances are that customer isn't going to come back for a year or two, maybe 3 or 4. But again, if you are selling toothpaste, for example, and you have a $30 average order value, and you're working at, like, we'll say 60% gross margin, so your margin on an order level is going to be about $18. So if you were trying to be profitable on first order, you need to acquire that customer below $18. That's going to be really, really difficult. Not really, really difficult, but you actually just won't acquire that many. But if you're confident in the data that your customer shops once a month, so let's look at 1 year in terms of a time difference for the lifetime component of LTV. So if you're looking at 1 year as your LTV, your 1 year LTV will be $18 multiplied by 12 months of the year. So you're looking at $216 of LTV throughout the year. Now, say, for instance, you could actually say, okay, instead of paying $18 for that customer, I'm going to ramp that up to $54. So you're not going to make money on the first order. You're not actually going to make money in the second order, but you're going to break even on the third. But you're confident that that customer is going to shop with you 12 times throughout the year. Because you've tripled the amount you're willing to pay for a customer, you can now acquire a hell of a lot more customers throughout the year. And again, it's all about trying to find that sweet spot between where does that CAC to LTV ratio sit? So if you were and you were looking at your CAC to LTV in that scenario, you're looking at, okay, my customer lifetime value for that customer for this year is going to be $216, and I'm willing to pay $54. That indicates I've got an LTV to CAC of 4-1, which is pretty healthy for any brand.
Yeah, and you touched on all the major dynamics that are important there. And one way that I like to explain to the brands that I work with how to think about how this translates to the blended contribution margin as a percentage of revenue that they see on their financial statements is that what it comes down to is every month, what is the sales mix between first orders and repeat orders, right? Because if your first order, let's say, is break even, so that's a 0% contribution margin, and let's say that's 50% of your revenue, and the other 50% of your revenue has a 25% contribution margin, and that's based on repeat purchases, your blended margin's 12.5% for that month, right? And so it becomes this, when you're looking at like financial statement projections, P&L projections, what is the blend of break even first orders versus profitable future orders? And you can start actually toying with how much of your budget, not just from a CAC perspective, but like total dollars can you allocate to just first order, the first orders being break even, right? And so anyways, it all comes down to understanding. It becomes easier as the payback time horizon shortens, right? And there's more frequent purchases, and it gets harder as the payback time horizon increases, because you're basically trying to run the business on a very low or negative or zero first order profitability margin for a longer period of time. And it's starting to become, as I work with dozens of different brands, I originally come from one brand, Guardian Bikes. I was on the founding team on the brand side, so I got to just see our economics. Now, as a fractional CFO for over time, dozens of brands, it's becoming increasingly clear to me that, like, if you want to talk about there not being a ceiling on a brand's ability to scale profitability or much higher ceiling, I'm seeing more and more it really is determined by how frequently you can get people to repurchase. Not necessarily. There are market dynamics. You have a certain total addressable market, and different product categories can only grow so big. But at Guardian, we're selling bikes. People did repurchase bikes, but every couple of years they bought a new size. That's a lot harder of a play than a supplement that gets bought every 30 days, right? And so anyways, I love the distinction that you're making here between margin-based LTV, revenue-based LTV, and then first order profitability, and how those are all metrics that need to be understood. But if you understand them well, they're levers that you can pull strategically to really land on where you want to land from a margin growth perspective over time.
100%. And I suppose just to kind of finally summarize, we have added the new customer contribution margin metric into StoreHero. And yes, it is okay to be negative based on a number of factors. Okay, number one, you definitely understand your margins. You know exactly what the contribution margin piece actually looks like. Number two, you definitely want to understand the data that your customers, you want to be very, very sure on that purchase frequency that you're kind of building your models out on. And number three, if you are looking to work off negative contribution margin, you just want to make sure that you have the cash flow implications kind of lined up there as well, because if you don't, you're going to find yourself in a hole very, very quickly.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a big piece on the CFO front. We've been talking primarily about the P&L here, but we're also projecting cash flow at the same time. And so we're really looking at two different things. We're looking at, we're looking at the buildup of these different marketing economics to the P&L, but then we're also checking the cash flow statement and making sure that we can float that strategy.
Absolutely. Makes a ton of sense. Okay, next up we have five retention tips for your email marketing strategy heading into Q4. I've actually taken this one directly from the Profit First Playbook. We have had a contributor, Adam Kitchen, really, really good guy in the retention space. This is actually his contribution. So a couple of top tips for your email marketing strategy, I suppose, just kind of in line with the retention piece here. So start acquiring your customers now to maximize the profitability during BFCM. Don't wait for when the customer acquisition cost is at its most competitive and your margins are going to be at their slimmest. Start acquiring your customers now with a view to maximizing LTV during the peak trading periods through email and SMS. Number two, strengthen your inbox placement ahead of the event. BFCM is definitely the most competitive period in your customer's inbox, so make sure you've taken proactive steps to maximize your ability to reach them. Number three, build retention channels in parallel ahead of the main events channel, sales events channel. Email, SMS, and I suppose a new one that we're definitely starting to see this year and last year as well through direct mail. These should all definitely play a big role in strengthening your retention strategy for Q4. And it's definitely not a case of either or for these channels. They should all probably be used in conjunction with each other. Definitely try to drive as many email subscribers as possible to your SMS, and then also notifying them of early announcements for people who are on the text lists. The win-back flows, obviously we can do this all through Klaviyo, SMS and email, but a different strategy I suppose we're seeing just on this point here is that for win-back opportunities, try and lean into direct mail prior to the event, try and re-engage as many historical customers as possible with the kind of exclusive offers or discounts. Number four, continue the momentum into the holiday season. There's a lot of build up during this season, so it shouldn't just stop once BFCM ends. Christmas and New Year are also excellent opportunities for brands to drive repeat customer revenue, and you should further try and capitalize in this period with further offers and excitement. And finally, create different offers for each day of the holiday season. Might be hard to execute on, but kind of to your point earlier, John, that this is such a massive percentage of your revenue throughout the year that you really need to plan for each one of those holiday pieces of the holiday kind of calendar, I suppose, that we touched on earlier. So yeah, the most boring thing you can do is send repetitive offers out every single day. Make sure each one is bold and different, so you can condition your customers to keep coming back and checking their inbox. This is the best way to keep engagement high and deliverability strong.
I love it. And just one comment I want to make, because this comes up a lot with brands that I work with. Some of them really understand the place that email has in the marketing strategy, and some of them don't fully grasp it. That's not, marketing isn't their area of expertise. The reality is that you've acquired the email, right? Some of these people have purchased from you, some of them haven't. It is one of the most cost-effective ways to not only get someone to purchase, but to talk to them directly, right? Because when you're doing paid social, you're doing stuff upper funnel, there's plenty of competition in someone's email inbox, but there's way more higher up in the funnel on YouTube and Facebook and the like, right? And so email is not only your opportunity to drive, purchases at a really low acquisition cost, but it's your opportunity to speak to someone in a much more directly than you can in other channels.
Yeah, and I actually saw a really good use case of this last year with an Irish brand, Gym Plus Coffee. What they did earlier on in November was they did an early access sale through email, but to access the sale, you actually had to download their new app that they just launched for the D2C brand. So again, trying to get that more owned media piece where, again, everybody wanted access to the sale because they were going to sell out, but now everybody has that app on their phone and you can now target them through push notifications and so on and so forth, further enhancing that kind of retention piece as well. So again, you can be clever about how you actually look to target the customers through email.
Love it.
Okay, discounting and offers. It's no secret that this time of the year is very, very offer heavy. So just kind of touching on, I suppose, some of the most typical offers that we would see. So your percentage discounts, fixed discounts, free shipping discounts, buy one, get one free discounts. Again, these can these can all be used in a multitude of different ways. Just kind of picking which one works for your brand. One probably big one that we haven't mentioned here is bundling offers. So bundling some of your most profitable or your most popular products together to kind of drive average order value, all with the intention, I suppose, of just making sure that we're constructing the offer in accordance with margin, because again, kind of going back to that fascination with revenue oriented metrics throughout businesses, if you have your e-commerce or your marketing manager is purely being KPI'd on revenue metrics, they might be incentivized to just give a 20 to 30% discount to really drive sales. And guess what? It probably will drive sales, but you might end up being a busy fool where you actually don't have much left at the end of the day. So really just trying to think about protecting your margin. So if you are looking to give out a discount on a different offer or on a different campaign, how does that affect other components of the business? For instance, if we look at this piece here and we can see, okay, the product price is $100, our full cost of goods. So again, not just product, but also thinking about freight out, transaction fees, 3PL costs. Say, for instance, we had a target cost per acquisition of $30. That would mean that we have a contribution margin left here of $30. Now, say, for instance, we still want to maintain in option B here, we're going to apply a 20% discount, but we still want to maintain the $30 contribution margin. To do that, we actually would need to drop the target CPA from $30 down to $10. Now, again, just to kind of put the caveat on that, that's probably not, we don't need to drop it all the way down to 10. Once you do start to introduce some kind of discount, you will be driving a higher volume through. But just to kind of compare like for like here, in that your target CPA to achieve the same contribution margin would need to drop directly in line with the discount that you are giving. We often kind of see it referred to as discount adjusted marketing efficiency ratio. So you're almost adding the discount that you're giving away to your cost per acquisition. And just, it's an interesting way to think about it. The discount you're giving is not free, and just making sure that you're thinking about protecting your margin above all else.
Yeah, I actually recently started, this Q4, I had most brands I work with ask me how to forecast in our projections the impact of holiday discounts. And I throughout the year, I usually use an average discount and usually the average discounts are for things like if you give like a coupon code to sign up for the email list, they're kind of evergreen discounts, right? And it's usually connected to email capture. I have a baseline discount all throughout the year, but then for a big sale, I actually project discounts for a big sale as a marketing expense in my projections. And it gives a much clearer picture, I think, when you're doing a big discount event of really how that impacts your contribution margins.
It's an interesting way to look at it, but like that makes complete sense, because it's exactly what it is. It is a marketing cost, because if you were a marketer and you were being KPI'd on a $30 CPA, and again, you go to the last example here, you go to this example here, and you put on the 20% discount, and you still hit your target CPA of $30. You've done your job, but you've also lost the business $20 of margin immediately. So just making sure that you're thinking about margin as you start to construct those offers, and that the KPIs that we kind of set for the team are definitely, I suppose, all cognizant of those discounts and how they affect. Okay.
All right. This is what I've been waiting for. Sorry to cut you off. Here it is. Contribution margin, profit first marketing. Here we go.
Okay, so yes, I knew your eyes would light up with this one, Sam. So contribution margin, absolutely. So I'm sure a lot of people have probably started to see this term bandied around D2C Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Google throughout the last year. It's definitely started to gain a hell of a lot more traction than before. So essentially what contribution margin is it's your net sales minus your full cost of goods. So we're not just talking product cost here. We're also talking transaction fees, fulfillment fees, shipping costs as well, minus your total marketing spend. And this is your contribution margin. So it's essentially your profit after your marketing spend, but before your operating costs.
Yeah, and one comment I want to make about this, because you know, what this is somewhat of a more kind of advanced way to look at contribution margin, but I think something that's super important. So I was originally an accountant, what's called a CMA in the US, certified management accountant, and studying what's called cost behavior is like a super core focus of that program. And cost behavior is really all about understanding the difference between variable costs, fixed costs, and mixed costs. And what Thomas has here in full COGS, this is one of those definition nuances. What that really is what are called the variable costs that are associated with getting those orders to the end customer. And so, like he mentioned, that's product cost, shipping to the customer, the cost to pick, pack, fulfill the order, and payment processing fees. And then the marketing costs are your variable marketing costs, which are the per order costs associated with acquiring someone. And so effectively what we have here, and what Thomas has defined as your profit after marketing but before operating costs, whatever contribution margin dollars you have left over, those are what's available to pay your fixed operating costs. Fixed meaning as sales volume goes up and down, those costs don't change. They stay the same. And so as contribution margin dollars go up and fixed costs remain flat, that delta between the two, that's what hits your bottom line. And that's why it's this term contribution margin is such a hot topic, because it really is, above all else, it is the actual driver of bottom line profitability. With that plus the impact of your fixed overhead cost, that is actually what drives profitability in your business.
Absolutely. And I mean, I suppose why has it become almost a prerequisite for everybody to start understanding? Probably a number of reasons. Obviously, it's no secret, since June, I think it was 2021, Apple introduced iOS 14.5. Hell of a lot of privacy issues there just meant that the reliability that we all probably have with Facebook and Google in terms of being able to properly attribute revenue has definitely been undermined. So the contribution margin piece cannot lie. There's no over double attribution or under reporting. The contribution margin is what it is, and it can't lie. So understanding, if we start to increase our marketing spend, do those absolute contribution margin dollars go up? If they do, this indicates that, I suppose, the increase in ad spend has been effective and it's driven incremental profit. If you get to a point, and we'll come to this in a second, where you actually start increasing your ad spend, but your revenue goes up, but that contribution margin piece starts to dwindle, you've probably hit a point of diminishing marginal returns. And it's probably an idea to maybe pull back in the short term and look at, is there other ways that we can probably look to optimize margin, or site optimization, or increasing average order value, and so on and so forth. Next up there, I suppose, contribution margin just gives us a real focus on profit over just direct sales revenue. Again, if you're solely KPIing your business on sales revenue, you could be focusing on the wrong things if you are really ultimately looking to focus on profitability and not just sales revenue. It definitely gives businesses confidence and clarity when raising ad budgets. This is probably the main reason, I suppose, that it's really starting to hit home this year, and everybody's seeing their ad costs go up. Telling an SME or a business that they need to increase their ad spend by X percentage is kind of terrifying if you've just seen your cost to acquire customers go up significantly over the year. But if you have a refined data source where you can actually accurately look at your contribution margin on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and see how does the impact of increasing or decreasing that ad spend have on that margin. It'll just give you a hell of a lot more confidence and clarity to either increase it effectively or just give you the confidence that when you pull back that you're doing so effectively.
Here's an idea that just popped into my head. The other reason why brand founders are so worried about just being told by, say, their agency to scale up ad spend's usually tied to the revenue that the agency's making, right? And ad spend doesn't necessarily mean contribution margin. So here's an idea. Let's start the first ad agency that charges their success fee on increased contribution margin dollars instead of increased ad spend. You make more money, we generate more margin dollars for you, we make more money, right? There's when you're focusing on contribution margin and you're making ad spend decisions that are aligned with that, because it's one of two major drivers of your bottom line profitability, you're making ad spend decisions that are directly aligned with profitability, whereas looking at just ad spend oftentimes does not necessarily align with driving profitability.
And it's amazing because like we often speak to business owners where it's pretty evident immediately that they're spending way more dollars on ads than they need to be. And once we actually start to pull back, like one business you're working with reduced their ad spend by 50%, sales dropped by about 5 or 6%. So all that increased efficiency all flow directly to the contribution margin dollars. So I think on what you've outlined there as a mechanism for both businesses and agencies to align on a certain KPI, I think that makes a ton of sense.
Absolutely.
And finally there, I suppose, looking at your contribution margin will actually help you identify if you have an ads problem or if you have an operational expense problem, because you might be running your business and thinking, I'm working with this agency, I'm not profitable. But when you actually look at the nuts and bolts of it, you've got a 50% OPEX problem. And what you think might be an ads problem might actually be an operational expense problem as well. So it's a really important distinction to look at net profit or EBITDA versus your contribution margin. And if one is massively different to the other, it'll just give you a quick indication as to where the problems actually might be.
Absolutely. I love that.
Next up, we have high ROAS often equals lost opportunity. I'm sure there's people looking at me with 10 heads thinking, what are you talking about? We've all been trained into this mindset of we need to optimize for high ROAS all the time. And yes, while that might sound right, just make sure if you are optimizing for a certain ROAS target that you know exactly why you're doing it and you have it backed up with data on your margins. So for instance, I often speak to business owners who come to me and say, well, we don't spend any more once we hit a 6 ROAS. And when you dig into it, it's because they were getting a 10 2 years ago. And they were getting a 10 2 years ago, and now they see 6 and they don't want to go below it. But when you actually dig into it, their break-even point could actually be a hell of a lot more than it. So what I've kind of done here is actually just done out an example from a brand. So we can see here that obviously as you start to increase your ad spend, you will kind of hit a point of diminishing marginal returns where your ROAS does decline as you spend more. And that's fine if you have your numbers dialed in. But for instance, if you were a brand here who said that we're not going to spend any more once we hit 6.5, we're going to cap it off at $50,000. You would have actually only left yourself with 145,000 in contribution margin at the end of the day. Whereas if you said, okay, we're going to keep increasing until we get down to a 5, we've spent $100,000 at a 5 ROAS, and we've generated 500K in revenue. We've said we're operating at about a 60% gross margin. That would have meant that our contribution margin would have been left at 200K, which is the optimum point on this graph here. Now, if we look at the very next line there, we can see that, okay, the brand then spent more money. They spent $125,000, but the ROAS actually went down to 4.25. And this is a really, really important point here, because you can see the revenue actually went up by $30,000, but the absolute contribution margin that the brand had left at the end of the day had actually started to dwindle. So even though they'd spent more and the revenue went up, they were at a point where they kind of hit their optimum limit, and the actual profit that the business was left with starts to dwindle. So It's not to say that when you get to that point, your business can never scale up again. It absolutely can, but you're going to need to look in other areas in terms of margin innovation, site optimization, that kind of thing. But again, just a really, really important point that if you are looking to set a target ROAS or an MER target, just make sure that you have your data backed up properly to probably ascertain why you're looking to set that target.
Yeah, this is a really great example. As you know, the contribution I made to the ebook you guys launched was on this exact topic. I was showing the math of how you could drop your ROAS by 30%, but if you could scale ad spend high enough to overcome that drop in your ROAS, you could actually generate more absolute contribution margin dollars. Holding fixed overhead, constant, you would generate more profit dollars. And there's a lot of people who there's a lot of people who replied to that and were kind of angry at my post saying like, that's not possible. And here's where I really think the rub is in practice. And this is where we help our clients a lot as CFOs that are experts in e-commerce. In reality, this data that like we're looking on the screen, it's not always a certainty. It's what we think will happen or what has maybe happened in the past. There are things that change all the time in the funnel. You can release new creative. You can open a new ad channel. Like you mentioned, Thomas, you can do site optimization. You can change these metrics in the future. But what we're able to do as CFOs is help you at least run scenarios. Like, could you spend 100K and you think you can get to a 5 ROAS? And if you spent 200, do you think you could do better than a 2.75? And so you can look at this range of scenarios and you can place your bet on which one you want to try going after. And if it doesn't, your hypotheses, your assumptions break down, you can retreat back to one of the other lines on this graph. And like, that's what a CFO who understands e-com should help you do, is if you don't know this data for certain, but you have some hypotheses based on historical data, they can build projections to help you look at what each of these scenarios would look like in terms of what contribution margin it would drive. And then you can go place those bets and see if they turn out to be true or not.
Really nicely led into the next slide, John. Why finance and marketing actually need to work together. Just to kind of preface the next couple of slides, I suppose, in the last couple of years, I think these two functions were allowed to operate in silos. This is the reason why was that they were kind of masked. The industry was masked by really cheap CAC and ROAS and Facebook and Google, in that you had marketers knocking it out of the park, doing a really great job. Accountants and finance people were really able to do their job. The two didn't really need to be in unison, and you could have had a really profitable brand. If you had a good product, you had a good website, and you're willing to spend money, you were going to make a lot of money. Your finance and marketing team didn't really need to understand each other too much. But I think as these ad costs have got more and more expensive, and just generally the inflation has driven the cost of the cost of doing business up, those two functions I think need to be completely in line with each other for brands to really survive and thrive 2023 and beyond. So I think marketers really need to start understanding finance, need to be able to speak finance. And no, I'm not saying every marketer needs to become an accountant. I'm definitely not saying that. But understanding margin is incredibly important. And understanding that your margin doesn't stop at your product cost is also very, very important. So like a lot of brands you speak to kind of see Facebook and Google as a black box. We're going to spend X and we hope it kind of works, but we're not really sure if it will. We'll wait till we get our accounts at the end of next month and see, did it work? The days of easy ROAS and CAC on Facebook and Google are over. Not to say that you can't grow a profitable e-com brand, you absolutely can. But a trend we're seeing, I suppose, is that the best brands we're working with, their marketers are all working on a margin basis, and their finance teams are very, very comfortable in speaking marketing and e-com lingo, because you don't want to get into a situation where your accountant or your finance team, you're just one of their clients and you're their only e-commerce client. Because if you're in a situation like that, then this probably leads me on to the next one, actually. If you're in that kind of situation, then you're essentially like, we're dealing with 100 different acronyms on a daily basis, John.
Yeah,
Conversion
exactly.
rates, average order values, ROAS, MER, CAC, LTV. If you're not in the weeds with this stuff every day, it's like reading double Dutch, and it can be impossible for somebody who's not overly familiar with e-com and marketing to really understand the nuances of what each of those metrics really means. So I think it's imperative, almost a prerequisite today, to make sure that if you are taking your financial advice from your bookkeeper or your accountant or your CFO, that they are well able to speak EComm. They're well able to speak marketing, because that's going to be a massive differentiator in the next couple of years, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you tee it up for me to agree with that. That's what we do at Free to Grow CFO. We are fractional CFOs and bookkeepers specifically for growing e-commerce brands, and we are in this same world that you're talking about all day long. Marketing, really, two of the biggest things that we're looking at all the time that are, not unique, but a specific focus of a growing e-com brand: inventory management, right? And marketing and scaling marketing and understanding how this all ties back to contribution margin. And we see this all the time. We see prospects come to us who have been working with a CFO firm and they don't specialize in e-com, and the person who takes over the account is trying to learn e-com along the way. And it's hard to get up to speed. And you know what makes it even harder? Things are changing every single day. So like, as soon as you learn it, what's going on, something changes, right? And like, and we're experts at that because we're just in e-com all day, every day. And so we're speaking the language, and the cool thing is too, we're seeing patterns across all the brands that we're working with. We're seeing something on Facebook happen with one brand that we can warn another brand about, right? Yeah. And so anyways, you're absolutely right. And the same thing goes with marketing agencies. Like, there are marketing agencies out there that are not focused on e-com, and try to bring them into scaling your e-com brand, and it can be a real disaster.
Absolutely. I just think, to probably finish off these two slides, is like bridging the gap between marketing and finance is probably the most important point to focus on for your brand over the next couple of years. Again, those two functions probably didn't need to live together, understand, or talk to each other too much in the last couple of years, because the return on your ad spend was so good. But having those two functions fluidly interacting with each other and planning and aligning together to drive profitability for your business is like a superpower in operating an e-commerce brand today. So just can't reiterate that point enough.
Absolutely.
So we speak to a lot of brands who still come to us and say that they're not profitable at the end of the day. So if you're not as profitable as you like to be, kind of breaking it down into two buckets, you've got high contribution margin, but you've got high operational costs. You've got an operational cost problem. On the flip side of that, you've got low contribution margin, but you've got low operating costs. You've got a contribution margins problem. So very, very different problems, but we just kind of pull them apart in the next couple of slides here. So if you are generating really good profit after marketing spend, your contribution margin is high, but you're not actually generating much of a net profit at the end of the day, it probably sounds like you've got an operational expense problem. So I'm not sure if you would agree, John, but a good benchmark is probably around 15 to 25% in terms of OPEX, in terms of a percentage of your net sales.
Yeah, when you start getting north of 25, it's really, really hard to turn a profit. And I do see some who will hang out between 10 and 15. But what actually almost always inevitably happens, if you are actually scaling, 10 starts to become too lean, and there's something else in the operation that breaks down. I would say, like, really operationally excellent as around 15, generally speaking, 15 to 20. And as you get to 25, there are definitely brands who can sustain that, but some don't have high enough margins to sustain that.
Yeah, 100%. I've spoken to a couple of brands in the last month who come and say that their agency isn't doing the best job. And when you actually plug StoreHero in, the agency is actually knocking it out of the park, and the contribution margin is really high. But when we look at, we have a real-time P&L in StoreHero where you can see every kind of line of the P&L as a percentage of net sales. So for instance, they thought their agency was the problem, but they actually had 55% OPEX in there. And
yeah,
that's your problem.
That's hard. That is hard. That's real hard
really
hard to do and be profitable.
Absolutely. So trying to monitor your staff costs, software costs, and also, I suppose, the last piece there, like we've kind of spoken the whole webinar here about maximizing contribution margin, but I suppose there is times when it makes sense to reduce your contribution margin, but if you can reduce your OPEX even more. So if you are operating a warehouse and you have to pay for your rent for your warehouse and all the staff to man the warehouse, try and figure out, okay, what's take your cost for the last 12 months, take your total software costs and staff costs to man the warehouse, and actually divide it by the number of orders and see, like, what is your pick pack fee for that product? and then kind of get some quotes from a 3PL. And if there's a massive delta there, you probably have a big opportunity to maybe switch from in-house fulfillment to a 3PL. That's definitely one area of margin innovation that we typically tend to see.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And honestly, I know we're running up on time here soon, but like we have very few clients who successfully fulfill in-house, and it's not that it's not possible. It's just that you've got to be pretty large or have really solid margins excluding fulfillment costs to be able to sustain that, because that's really a volume play. You have to be at such a high volume that the contribution margin impact offsets, like you said, the fixed costs of operating that. And usually 3PLs can just do it better.
Sure, absolutely. And even just mind share, you're not needing to manage a warehouse and a team of people in there every day as well. So it can allow you to focus your time better in other areas. So we have one more slide, and then we can wrap up and take some questions. So on the flip side of that, you might have low contribution margin, low operating costs, but you're still not making much money. Probably dives down to, are you actually spending enough? Do you have data to back up why you're spending at the levels you're spending? Are you not being aggressive enough with your spend? Have you tried to employ new creatives? Could you tend to maybe look to shop around to improve your margins on a product level, shipping, fulfillment level, or often look to optimize your channel mix as well? Are you a D2C brand? Is your customer acquisition cost going up, and you're trying to struggle to make the contribution margin piece work? Have you tried operating on maybe marketplaces or opening physical retail or operating a wholesale channel as well? There is other channels out there that you can easily plug your Shopify subscription into that it can allow you to sell in channels that often may be more lucrative in today's market as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, that was pretty much it from my side. So thanks for listening, and we can answer any questions.
If anyone does have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the comments. I don't see any yet. We'll wait a few here, and if there's not, then we will go ahead and close up here.
Any points that stuck out to you there, John?
No, I mean, look, I think in summary, we at Free to Grow CFO also recognize that in the e-commerce context, the connection between marketing and finance is the future. It's one of the reasons I love what you guys are doing at StoreHero with, your platform really connecting what's happening on the marketing front with what's happening on the bottom line profitability front. And honestly, like, I think one of the biggest unlocks for a lot of brands I talk to is understanding the difference between what you call absolute contribution margin dollars, the margin dollars that are available to cover your fixed overhead, and then after covering overhead, drop to your bottom line. If you can really take the time as a brand founder or brand leader to understand that concept, it will put you undoubtedly a cut above the average e-commerce brand leader. And if you need any help understanding that, you can reach out to Thomas. You can reach out to myself. With that being said, Thomas, why don't you tell everyone really quick how they can contact you and learn more about StoreHero?
Sure. So you can contact us through the website, StoreHero.ai. You can find me on LinkedIn at Thomas Gleeson, or you can just send me an email directly at thomas@StoreHero.ai. And yeah, we're offering a free 14-day trial to utilize StoreHero. So if anybody has any interest in getting set up on the platform, just drop me a message, and I'm more than happy to facilitate that.
Awesome. And on my end, if anyone wants to contact me, you can find me on LinkedIn, John Blair. You can visit our website, freetogrowcfo.com. And yeah, man, Thomas, I always appreciate getting a chance to chat with you. I know we chat monthly, but it's fun to chat a little bit more than that doing this webinar. And yeah, contribution margin is here to stay, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you to get the word out to everybody, so that e-commerce brands can really change the way that they look at their business.
Absolutely. And thanks very much for your contribution to the ebook as well, and all the help you've given us. It's been fantastic.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thanks for joining. And yeah, we'll be doing another one of these soon here. So if any comments or questions come up afterwards, feel free to comment straight in the LinkedIn thread.
Thanks, guys.